Hello, and welcome to this episode of Musically Cogitating, a podcast about the relevance and importance of living in contemporary music of all kinds, and about how that music impacts our everyday lives. I am your host, Ciyadh Wells. Thank you for joining me here today, and I hope that you enjoyed that little bit of something different before this intro. I am giving the show a little bit of a makeover in the way of having some new intro music. And so let me know what you think. I am probably going to change it up a lot because I think it's a little fun thing that we can do, especially because this is a show about music and I want to share some of my own music at some point. So yeah, just let me know what you think. Like I said, thank you again for joining me here Wednesday after every other Wednesday. As always, any important and relevant links will be in the show notes. And if you are enjoying this show, please subscribe and leave a review if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts or if you are on Podchaser, which is like social media for podcasts. A little news before we get into today's show is that the podcast now has a Discord server. So if you're unfamiliar, Discord is a community building and messaging platform that we can use to interact with each other. So if after listening to this episode or any of the episodes, you can go in there and you can ask questions, you can chat, and we can just have a chill time with like-minded folks. So the invite will always be linked in the show notes. And you can just join and you can always hang out there. There is a special channel there that you'll see, which is usually, I think, located in the left-hand pane, that is specifically for the book club, which brings us to today's episode. This is the second episode in a 3-part series of the first Musically Cogitating Book Club. And we are going to be discussing the second part of The Revolution Will Not Be Funded Beyond the Prison. The Revolution Will Not Be Funded Beyond the Nonprofit Industrial Complex. Although I'm sure at some point we will talk about the prison industrial complex as well. But this is the second part in which Jess and I go through the second set of essays in the book. So without any further ado, here it is. Okay, I think we're on.
Awesome.
So today we are going to be discussing part 2 of The Revolution Will Not Be Funded, and the title of this part of the book is Nonprofits and Global Organizing. And wow. I mean, just any initial thoughts or reactions about this global organizing? I felt like this was like a little less global than that says, but it's still all really relevant.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think in context of like classical music, I really kind of looked at this part through the lens of like cultural imperialism, even within North America. I don't know if it's a little too much for the podcast, but
no, it's never too much.
Yeah, it's all relevant. It's all relevant.
So I would encourage you to, if you haven't listened to part 1 of us reading and talking about this book, please do that. But you don't have to listen to them in order. I don't think. Like the book is a collection of essays. Each essay is its own essay. Its own individual, thought and all that. So it's definitely not a requirement. And the first essay I think that we're going to spend some time talking about is The Filth on Philanthropy, and which is probably one of the best titles that I've ever heard
So good.
for an essay, because I mean, philanthropy is filthy. Like it's
It really
ragged.
is.
It's and I'm thinking and I think generally the filth that is being referred to here is talking about foundation philanthropy and foundation wealth in large scale, like that kind of stuff. We're not going after anyone, any of us individuals, normal folk who are really just organizing and fundraising to help fund each other's work and projects and things like that. So
yeah,
that's kind of about the title and just generally the MO of this book.
Yeah. So going after foundations with a big F, but not going to name any names because, got to protect the innocent, got to protect our jobs, still got to make rent. Yeah, I think I'm a big fan of this essay because for two reasons. I think it really provides good context once again about how foundations and donors and wealthy families oftentimes co-opt and de-radicalize anti-establishment movements, often led by Black people, brown people, other marginalized communities, to make it within the neoliberal aesthetic and capitalist aesthetic that best serves them. And then I think the second reason too is it really talks about white liberal leadership in nonprofits, which is incredibly relevant in my mind to classical music, with like using that as a big umbrella term. But those were like the two things that really stuck out to me about this essay. Ciyadh, how about you?
I would agree. There's this part about how progressive philanthropy uses people of color to maintain the status quo, and I had a little bit of a existential crisis.
Yep.
It's just like, oh gosh, is this me? And then I was like, probably yes. And then I was like, well, I gotta eat. But I see this happen so much. And, when I used to live in Texas is the South, but like Georgia is a different kind of South than Texas. But when I was living there, I feel like I met a lot of people who were doing like really radical, really progressive work. And then like they got out of college, and like we all do, we need to survive. And so we end up working for organizations, music or not or whatever, that we don't love what they, might do or advocate for on behalf of, but, we need to work, and we get kind of sucked up into this system, and we help maintain the system because of, any number of like, well, again, we have to take care of ourselves, but we eventually start to like believe the work or understand the work or something like that. I think that like we can be the change that we want to see. And I think people can be the change they want to see, obviously. But when it comes to these really heavily established nonprofits, that's probably not going to be the place. Unless there is, like, I think it mentions in this, maybe not in this essay, but just in all these essays, like, there has to be a really big calculated movement. And that's something you always kind of talk about is, if we want to make change, there has to be a movement of millions of people who are committed to, doing whatever we feel is necessary. So yeah, that was my general kind of reaction to this first essay. That was a lot, but what I thought.
Yeah, I think it's like, I often find myself, I kind of felt that. I feel like more on the side of like, oh God, like I'm like the white liberal in these, um, in these nonprofits who are like, who's like the safe person, who's like, oh, well, I'll be progressive, but like only to a point, that kind of thing. Like, um, and I think it's something that it catches you unaware a lot of times, right? Like
Mm.
when you're in music school specifically or in art school, you're taught like, ooh, nonprofits like the end all beat all. If you want to like make change, you do this and you're doing good work because you're inherently doing good work. It's a nonprofit, right? You're serving your community. And I mean, I think that's like the whole thing about this entire book is like nonprofits are not inherently good. Um, and I think what this essay really outlines really nicely is how the nonprofit acts as a like barrier between the wealthy and the community, and often acts as kind of like the gatekeeper for what is how wealth is distributed, what is socially acceptable in terms of change, and how they kind of perpetuate people like us through placing emphasis on like what they called like bourgeoisie credentials, right?
Right. Like people who have degrees or training or sometimes maybe a little bit of wealth or any of
Mm-hmm.
those things that make you seem like, oh, like this person is good enough for our organization or whatever.
Yeah, which I think is just like a huge issue in classical music in general, and that's something that's talked about in this entire like second part is this idea of like professionalization, bourgeoisie credentials. Usually, I think I've seen it in classical music through education. So, like, I personally don't have a master's degree, I have a bachelor's. And a lot of people in this world are very like, there's a lot of emphasis placed on like those really high, like continued education degrees. Like, if you don't have a master's, I don't know, like your professional experience, your lived experience just doesn't quite live up to my master's degree or my DMA or my PhD, which is like not to say that those are inherently bad things, but they're also very economically restrictive things. And then even looking back, what does that tell people who are like really good musicians but couldn't afford to go to music school? That kind of thing. Or I think I even have like summer festivals is a big gatekeeping thing for
Oh,
us. Teach your lineage. So like, okay,
oh my gosh.
right?
Oh, in the guitar world, like I can't speak for any of the other instrument worlds, but in the guitar world, that whole lineage piece is so big
Yeah.
and it really bothers me because I don't care who you studied with. I don't care who your teacher studied with or your teacher's teacher studied with or like who made your guitar or any of that other stuff. Like that is not important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Teacher lineage doesn't mean anything and yeah. And like summer festivals, like I went to summer festivals like I felt like kind of later,
Mm-hmm.
like than most people typically would, but I felt like it was like, oh, gotta do this thing to like seem legitimate and to
Yeah.
like as I sit here in a summer festival sweatshirt, like, like it's like, okay, this is gonna be my seal of approval from all of these people. And like it's on my resume, but I don't know if that means anything to anybody. But so yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it's like, and there's like such a dichotomy. Like I remember in school, the people who had to work the summer festivals and the people that could attend the summer festivals. And usually to attend, you either have to get a scholarship or you have to be able to pay. And if your family just doesn't have wealth or you don't take out a loan or if you personally don't kill yourself working X amount of jobs to be able to pay for these summer festivals, like you're already kind of behind professionally, which kills you in the professional world. And I see it in the nonprofit all the time, in nonprofit worlds all the time. Like we're supposed to be these great community bridging things, that kind of thing. But we're still hiring people that meet all these credentials. We don't really let I put that in quotations, outsiders into the hierarchy of administration or who we're hiring to present, that kind of thing.
It's this. I think I wrote this note somewhere. It's like the uh, institutionalization of service, but also
Mhm.
like the professionalization of service. Like, and there's an article that talks about anti-violence organizations, and they kind of address this whole problem of like there might be someone who ends up working for your organization who might be a survivor of some type of violence, and there is this thought that that person might not be good enough to do that work
Mhm.
because they might have too been a victim and or a survivor of that kind of trauma, and that makes like no sense. But
Yeah.
also it's the professionalization of the nonprofit. It's the professionalization of service.
Mhm.
You have to have read these books. We're reading books, but you have to have, maybe I'll say, you have to have gone to this school, been intern at this place, gone to this camp, like as you said, just in order to help somebody.
Mhm.
Like what did, like
How does
what
that make sense? Yeah.
make it make sense?
Yeah, yeah. And it's something that I see so much. I think I wrote this note down, like, you see it in symphonies and orchestras, like they'll bring on, like black people to play in the orchestra, but they're not interested in their thoughts. They just want to use their image.
Yes. Yeah.
Or, you'll see like education outreach programs, and like we should be hiring teachers that are reflective of those communities. And like we need to be careful of, maybe those teachers don't fit the like high class credentials or whatever we're talking about, but they're very capable educators. It doesn't mean that they're not good, but we're still not going to hire them because they don't fit our perception of that professional or upper echelon of musician, creator, educator, that kind of thing. And we're just like continually shooting ourselves in the foot with inclusivity and diversity DEI initiatives that
Mhm.
we're trying to do.
We'll come back. We're going to come back to this
Yeah.
this DEI initiative thing because thoughts,
Yeah.
thoughts. But yeah, this first essay, there's talk here about fundraising, which I think I'm supposed to be like a gifts officer. I don't know. I'm a development officer, whatever, in my jobby job, and I have so many thoughts just about fundraising in general,
Yes.
fundraising from individuals, but also from foundations and all of that. And I think, yeah. Is there anything that you wanted, anything more to say about this first essay before we kind of get to that fundraising, social change kind of stuff?
Reparations. White people should always be thinking about reparations, and that essay talks about this like so hardcore. And we'll talk about it later. But reparations,
Yeah,
we should be
it's got to happen.
thinking about that in classical music all the time. Yes.
Yes. Okay, so the next essay, there are like what, 9 essays?
There's a lot
8?
of essays.
There's a lot of essays. They're all great, by the way. I recommend all of them. Recommend 9 out of 9 of them. But the next essay is Between Radical Theory and Community Praxis: Reflections on Organizing and the Nonprofit Industrial Complex. And there, I think in this part of the book, more than any of the others, there's like this emphasis on people's lived experiences and their like reflections as expertise.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I don't know. I don't love the idea of expertise or whatever, but we're this is a book, so we're talking about it. But I think this is a great example of really being able to see what people mean when they say like this happened at a nonprofit that I worked at. These are the steps. Also, this is what we did to make things better.
Yes.
So generally, the author is recounting how she was working at one organization and there was some issues because there are at nonprofits. And this organization ended up being split into another organization, if I'm remembering this correctly.
Yeah.
And how the other organization that the author ended up working at, that was really an organization that she feels like was able to organize both like within and outside of the nonprofit industrial complex. And I think throughout this book, we all kind of realize that like nonprofits they kind of have to exist.
Yeah.
Like I've yet to, and maybe this gets more into it later. I've yet to like read in general about a world without nonprofits, what that would be like. So I think we all kind of know that like they're going to exist, and it's about, you know, are we going to exist within them or outside of them or between them? Which I think I am between them.
Yeah, it doesn't always have to be black and white.
Yeah.
And I think that's what this essay does a really good job of, is like, yes, I personally want to tear down the system. Let's seize the means. However, in the meantime, there are people who still like seriously need the services that nonprofits offer, just because like nonprofits are filling the gap that the government isn't offering via social services. And I think this essay really stuck out to me as like, okay, well, we have to exist. Here's like some action steps that you can take in the interim that are going to make it more inclusive, more equitable, less part of the industrial complex than maybe a traditional nonprofit model, which is what I really liked. I think my big thing that I took away from this, I even have it bracketed in my book, is like nonprofits always need to relate to a larger movement. Like thinking in a very singular fashion does not help anybody. And it's very much part of this like divide and conquer strategy that a lot of donors and foundations employ, basically. So we're not banding together in coalitions and making collective. We're not collectively acting together. So I think relating and learning how to do that in the classical music world is something that I'm really interested in, especially if you're providing like educational resources and things like that. You should absolutely be, forming coalitions with educators in your community, with policy change makers in your community. Like that should just be a no-brainer in my opinion.
Agreed. It's one of the projects that they did at this new organization that was founded was they kind of really took some time to establish like their politic and like who they were as an organization and like what that meant, and again that connection to a larger movement, but also how that would like play into all of their everyday work.
Yeah.
And she mentions that like that was a timely endeavor, and that is not easy work, but that it is essential work if you want to be, making some sort of change.
Yeah.
And so like they made a curriculum. The colonialism curriculum was a genuine attempt to revisit the political nature of our work as it related to a larger movement and a legacy of struggle. And I want to know, if a symphony is like, we want to really be doing this work, like I want to know what a like some sort of, it doesn't have to be a colonialism curriculum, but it'd probably be close to that. Like what that would look like for like an arts organization, like what that would be.
Yeah.
I think it would be reparations, right? Like it would include some sort of understanding around reparations, around like the canon, whatever that means. But yeah, that's the canon is a thing, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
But like, what else would it include, do you think,
Yeah.
from a musical standpoint?
No, I think you're totally right. I mean, the canon, absolutely. I mean, it has that has ties to Nazi ideology and their propaganda, which most people either know in passing or don't know, and we need to know that. I think obviously the understanding of foundations and nonprofit industrial complexes, obviously, like we're talking right now, would be part of that. Um, and then I think there really needs to be a conversation along with the reparations idea of like, and this is addressed in like one of the other essays, is the privilege of being part of the professional class or being the barrier between the wealthy class and the working class, and what exactly that entails, and what we as artists, as musicians, as administrators can do to subvert the narrative of protecting the wealthy. Like, how do we become um, accountable to the working class and middle class communities that we're in? So I think that's probably, some traditional like activism study, some traditional worker rights study, that kind of thing, in my opinion.
Yes, totally agree. Totally agree. One other thing that is said in this essay that I think is kind of a through line through the rest of the essays is that there's a difference between a social justice nonprofit and a small nonprofit with a business pursuit. And in my notes, I wrote, ding, ding, ding. Arts organizations need to figure this out.
Yes.
Because I think this is it, right? Small nonprofits, small arts organizations, they're really just a business pursuit.
Yes.
They don't really focus on social change or social justice or social service or any of those things.
Mm-hmm.
But because they've been nonprofitized, they feel like that is part of their work when it really shouldn't. And I want to at some point have a conversation about, maybe there's a book out there about this, but I want to have a conversation about, classical music versus non-classical music and the business, like the business of both music businesses. Because in the classical music world, it's more or less nonprofit, and in the non-classical world, it is for profit.
Yeah.
And like, that's okay, right? Like I don't care how much money Beyonce makes, right? Like, I'm going to still go to the concert. I'm going to still buy the CD. I'm going to get my t-shirt.
Yeah.
But like, if we were to pay long, I'm really just throwing these out there. I'm throwing people's names out there. Like any more money than we already do, people will be like, well, Long's not doing it for the sake of the music, of the art. They're trying to make a business.
Trying to capitalize.
Trying to capitalize.
Yeah.
And it's just like, well, what do you want? But sorry, that was like that little tagline there at the end. I don't know where that came from, but I think I'm really just trying to like, I want more people to know that in order to be in art, to be in music, you don't have to create a nonprofit in order for that to be profitable and sustainable, and that maybe we shouldn't be thinking of these things as nonprofits.
No, I 100% agree with it, even though I am like raging anti-capitalist. Like, we live in a society, right? Like, you still have to operate within the society, and we can't just keep being nonprofit. We can't be masquerading as nonprofits, really chasing what is capital, basically. Now, if you are a music nonprofit and you do want to do social justice work, which it seems like some people do, then you have to be fully committed to that work, though. You can't be riding a weird like gray area in my opinion that we oftentimes is a very lukewarm area, which we'll get into later, I feel like. But yeah, I 100% like we live in a society. It's okay to recognize that you need to operate as a business, and it's just like such a romantic ideal to be like musicians are divinely inspired and like we're going to be, you know, messing with the sacred if they're capitalizing off of their art. Like that's ridiculous.
So, yeah, it's just like your ensemble is a business. That's fine.
Yeah.
Like, and like keep it moving. So, all right, as we are going to do, I think for this essay, because there are a lot of things I will continue to kind of bring up. The next essay is Native organizing before the nonprofit industrial complex, which was interesting. It was a little bit of like before history
in the before
of
times.
Yeah, in the before times. Like, what did people actually do before nonprofits? Well, they organized.
They just did it.
They just did it.
It was just like refreshing. I think that's what I got from this is like the Madonna Thunderhawk. She just was very like, yeah, you just organize. You figure out what you're trying to do, and you do it. And resources, if you're doing proper community building, will either come via resource sharing or mutual aid. You don't have to appease the foundations to do the work if you're doing social work a lot of the time.
Yeah. And maybe you shouldn't. Like, that's also something that I think is kind of reiterated throughout this essay is like, this work requires sacrifice. Like, social change, social movement work requires sacrifice. And maybe that means that you don't make money from this because you're sacrificing yourself. I mean, you shouldn't have to sacrifice yourself, but you know, that's kind of where we are.
We live in a society.
you don't get to opt out.
Yeah. I think what I took from this too, that she's very adamant about, and we fall into this trap, is don't focus on singular events. And she says, quote, activism at this moment in time is relegated to events. And that's not real activism. Activism has to be normalized throughout your day-to-day life, has to be, you know, your rebellion towards whatever system you're fighting against has to be integrated daily in what you do. And classical music, new music, has such a hard time with this idea of like, we're putting on this amazing concert and it's going to do, you know, it's like a benefit concert for whatever, or, you know, it's Beethoven 9 and it's for the brotherhood of man and this kind of thing. And we just focus everything on singular events as opposed to a long form narrative of change. And it's detrimental in my mind.
I agree. And I think it's like I'm thinking of organizations who say that they want to be doing this work and then are trying to do it in a very kind of like not great lukewarm kind of way. Like there are plenty of organizations out there who are just like, you know, doing Beethoven 9 and that's it.
Yeah.
And they're just doing it and that's their thing. But, you know, foundations and donors and people are saying like, oh, you need to connect it to something else. So then they come up with this fake theme or fake way of connecting it to something that is like not really relevant and not really helpful. So because I want to caution people to the idea that if you don't want to do social change work, then just don't. Like you don't have to. You know, like you going and playing your guitar, plink plink, doesn't mean that you have to. That's me playing. That's how I sound. Like
dead.
That has to be what you're doing or what you know, because I think there's like, yeah, like we just create art because that's part of it. I think we are speaking, or I am speaking, especially to the people who like claim they want to do something and are doing it poorly, have not read any books, have not listened to any podcasts, have not like talked to any Black people, or brown people. Like that's who we're talking to. I think. What do you think? Because I don't think every single thing has to be connected unless you're saying that it's supposed to be.
Yeah, I would agree. Excuse me. I would agree with that. Yeah, like you don't have to make your life's work social justice. However, I would say to the white people in the room, you need to be thinking intersectionally all the time, because I think even if you're just going to like, oh, I just work in like symphony admin, everything you do has repercussions. And I do think there are a lot of things that you have to think about in your day-to-day life that do have kind of waves that like go out. How are you redistributing your wealth? Who are you giving your money to? Who you're giving your power to? So I don't think you're like ultimately your artistic pursuit always has to be social justice oriented, but I do think if you are privileged, you do have to go through life with a realization of that privilege, repercussions of that privilege, and how you're counteracting that for the better, in my opinion.
Gotcha. Yeah. No, I like that. Yeah. I like that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, maybe now's the time to have the conversation about active, like in this essay, she says, activism is tough. It is not for people interested in building a career.
Yes.
And I think this is a perfect time to discuss, activism as full-time paid work. Because I think she's kind of saying that, before the MPIC, it's like, no, we never thought about it like that. Mm-hmm. We didn't need it. We didn't need it.
Yeah.
We just did the thing. We were most concerned with, she says, we were just worried about whether the work would help our communities.
Yeah.
There was this focus on, is this work going to help my community and also feed me?
Mm-hmm.
So, like, what do you think? Activism as full-time paid work? Yes, no, maybe so.
Yeah. It's a big thing. I think there is a question of, are you moving towards reform or radical change? I think if you're doing radical change work, you're not going to get paid for that. You have to recognize if you are anti-establishment, if you're working outside of, if you're anti-capitalist, you're not going to get paid for that work. And you have to be willing to make a sacrifice of your time for that if you can. I think if you're doing reform work, and I think they both kind of have to happen to keep shifting society to a better place, I think you can do that within your job. I think you could probably work in a nonprofit, get your benefits, get your, X paycheck, and subvert the system. You do have to take risks to do that, though. If you're planning to get paid for activism work, you're going to have to realize that you're going to take risk at some point. Once again, that's my opinion. What are your thoughts on that?
As someone who used to still wants to be a full-time activist, I think that they're right, but that's maybe a hard pill to swallow.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, yeah, full-time activism work probably shouldn't, not that it shouldn't be compensated, but that shouldn't be the goal, right?
Yeah.
The goal should be the reform or, the goal should be the reform or the change or whatever, and not to profit off of that reform or change, even if that profit does sustain you personally.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and then it's like, well, then what do you do? And it's like, well, you have to work a job because that's the only option.
Yeah. it's a really hard line to walk. It is a hard pill to swallow. And I think it's like just the understanding that like if you're getting paid for your work, you're going to be beholden to somebody financially, right?
Yeah.
Like that's unfortunately, once again, we live in a society. Like I joke about it, but like we live in a capitalist society. And it's interesting. Once again, to protect the names of the innocent, I watching people who are activists on the ground, the way they kind of reconcile this is they go live out their principles by oftentimes working trade jobs with unions to strengthen collective action with workers' rights. And then because union gigs oftentimes afford you more privileges than jobs that don't have worker protections, they have the time on the back end to go do the activism work that they want to do while not having to worry about having to pay rent. Because I mean, our communities have been, and I think that's the one thing that this essay doesn't address maybe is like communities in the 60s and 70s were much more intact than the communities of today. Like you could probably go do activism work in your community. Like she's a native. I think her community was supporting her in a way that oftentimes our communities of 2020, about to be 2021, are not going to help us with in mutual aid, in that sharing of resources. So we have to come up with different tactics.
I mean, our communities are so disparate.
Yeah.
We live we live in the same city and I live 30 minutes from you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So like, yeah, you're not with your community anymore. And I think that's a realization that many of us need to kind of reckon with if we kind of work.
Yeah.
So huge work.
Yeah. Unless you're going to be like hardcore anarchists and like go squat somewhere and like, which you can do like by all means, but that's a hard life, y'all.
Oh, okay. So read that essay. She talks more. She talks more about being paid to do the work. And I would just say, go read it, think about it, and then send me an email. Okay. So the next essay is fundraising is not a dirty word. Community-based economic strategies for the long haul. I would say this is the most reformist.
Very reformist.
But not in a bad way. And
yeah.
I think in a really like, oh, this is someone else's context. And it's working, for them. So any first thoughts?
I'm not gonna lie, I had a hard time with this one, especially coming after the other two essays that came before it that were pretty radical. I think you're right. Like it provides a context that is helpful, and in my mind is once again a solution in the interim. Like what this essay presents for fundraising cannot be the end goal, cannot be the end game in my mind. No. It's just one of those things to help get you to the end game in a non-exploitive way. However, I do think reading this essay compared to the first essay that we discussed and doing a little research, it's very apparent to me that the founders of this particular organization that they're talking about, which is Project South, I think come from a place of connections that aren't always are a lot of organizations don't have all the time, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Right. Yes.
How about you?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think, again, being a development officer, as I'm called, that it does feel like, oh, this feels a little bit better, like this is like not so bad. Like, oh, it is a little, it is kind of maybe almost possible.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But again, like you said, I think this is like an in between. Like this is okay, over here you have this really bad thing, and this is like a middle ground for
Yeah.
getting to a point where, like this is all really different. I do like the idea of, well, I don't know that I like it, but they define like grassroots income as all income generated from individuals, fee for service, and non foundation sources. And I do like that, but I think individuals is reductionist. Like that can mean a lot of things. Like individuals can mean you or me, or that can mean Oprah.
Yeah.
Someone who has billions of dollars and someone who has not billions of dollars, speaking for myself. So I think that I don't know that I would call fundraising from Oprah or grassroots.
Well, and I think that's what like the first essay, right, addresses is like oftentimes they were talking about like grassroots funding and grassroots fundraising and how that's oftentimes presented as kind of a end all beat all type of thing. And they point out like the exact issue, like that often means you're courting wealthy individuals, which once again just kind of perpetuates the cycle of being beholden to oftentimes white liberals with money, right? And I'm not going to say that's better or worse than foundations. I think it probably gives you a little bit more freedom than foundations. But yeah, I just really can't stress enough like that cannot be the end goal.
No, so, yeah. No.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, and one of the other things that they kind of define is organizing, and they said that's building relationships and institutions that sustain community power, and if follows fundraising, and what follows fundraising is organizing. Sorry, and I wanted to discuss here, what is organizing? Because I see a lot of people, myself included, sometimes, but I think I'm getting better, as like, quote, organizing when you're really just doing a little project, doing a little something that might have some positive impact or influence, but it's really not large scale. It's really just this thing over here.
Yeah.
So what is organizing to you, and how do you feel about that broad idea of like everything is organizing? Because I don't agree with that.
Yeah, no, I think we're on the same page with that. And I definitely fall into that trap, right? Like it goes back to what we were just talking about. Like activism is not an event. It's a long sustained thing. And in my head, that's what it is. It's sustained relationships with your community. It's also educating yourself about like your community, like long standing things in your community. So you can like engage with people in a respectful, understanding, empathetic way. I don't know. I find like classical music, kind of relating it back, has a hard time with this, where it's oftentimes like, oh, I'm going to give free tickets to things.
That's not organizing.
That's yeah, but they call it organizing, right? Or like, oh, we're going to have like a Pops concert and we're going to invite like all these schools to come. But it's never like a sustained relationship. It's like a once a year annual thing. Doesn't go beyond that. So I think it's really, and I work as a director of community engagement. Like it's very, very easy to fall into those event-based things and call it community organizing. That was a bit of an aside, but yeah.
No, I think it's really relevant because like, at some point I'm going to pin this essay about databases not being organizing or like tools for social justice, because like I don't think that they are. And I think that they are like a pre tool for some people to engage in the bottom line work, which is programming, which is again what we say is like step -3 of 1,000 that people should be doing. But like there's this, like, people think that databases are organizing tools, and it's just like, it's not that. It's
Mm-mm. Mm-mm.
a website with some information, and that is it.
Yeah.
And I need for people to be moving beyond that as something to be it. You
Yeah.
know, like that's not it. And you know, I've seen so many like database or websites and people, I'm not going to name names, but people who are just like, yeah, I'm going to start this initiative and
Mhm.
we're going to do the diversify the thing. And it's like, that's not organizing work.
No,
Your website is not organizing
it's a
work.
tool.
Yes. It's a tool to assist people in doing their work.
Mm-hmm.
But that's it.
Yeah. I think like even going off of that as well is like true organizing work is a two-way street. You got to show up for people. And that's what we forget all the time is like, am I at like with my title, which I kind of hate, but like if I really want to be community organizing, I got to show up for the teachers. I got to show up to their union meetings, or I got to show up to their organizing committees. I got to be on the ground for them, hearing about, like, truly listening to what is going on, understanding what are the challenges they're facing. And so many people just don't show up. And then we just expect our community to just show up for our concerts or our initiatives, or we're surprised when they don't want to take part in an educational concert that we're doing. And it's like, you're not showing anything for them. Why should they care about you?
Yes.
And that's just like such an important thing to me is like, you just got to show up, and it's extra work, but you have to.
Yeah, especially to the white folks in the room. Like that's really the work that you're supposed to be doing.
Yes.
I mean, I'm doing my work. Yeah, of course. But you know, in addition to all of that, and I also want to say that organizing isn't yelling.
No.
I don't think it's yelling.
Mm-mm.
You know, there's a lot of yelling in the world, and sometimes you got to do that. Like, but yelling is not organizing. That is not activism. You holding people accountable can be and is part of it, but you yelling is not holding someone accountable. You yelling is just like being upset.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if there's a way to do less yelling, but just generally we have to understand better like what organizing is and means, and understand that it's messy.
Oh, yeah.
Because it is.
Yeah.
But allowing for that messiness not to interrupt the work,
Mm-hmm.
the little bit of the work that is happening.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
mm-hmm.
Because sometimes I just don't think it's that big a deal.
Yeah.
But,
no, I totally agree with that. Especially as somebody who has done a fair share of yelling and I think too, like, we have to realize, especially white people, or people who benefit from white privilege, and this kind of goes into the next one, is if you're yelling, it's probably coming from a place of you centering your whiteness.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
If you're a white person in the room and you think you need to be yelling, or you think you need to take reins or the leadership position, you're not doing what you need to do.
Oh my gosh. If I could insert the claps here, I would. I might figure out how to do that before I edit this episode. But so many people are just like, and they're like thinking that they are, because they some people, you know, might be marginalized in some way but still be white. They're like, oh, well, that part of my identity gives me the right to speak over all of these other people. And I don't think that gives you the right.
Nope.
I mean, I don't think it does.
No, it
As a
doesn't.
Black person, I'm gonna say it doesn't. So,
No, like
as the extra marginalized person in this room, no.
no. I yes, absolutely. Like I just want to like amplify that. Like if you're white, a lot of your other oppressions, I'm not saying they don't matter. However, in our society, we live in a society. Generally speaking, you're privileged. You're really privileged. And I think this like goes in like you highlighted in our notes. Going into the next essay. Sorry.
Oh yeah, no. The next essay is "We Were Never Meant to Survive: Fighting Violence Against Women and the Fourth World War." Okay, go.
You highlight this quote that I think is just so needed in classical music, especially for white people, is like, quote, embedded within the organizational strategy is an assumption of universal whiteness, unquote.
I almost threw my book.
Yes.
I was reading it.
And I'm coming from a place of that a lot of times. And like, it is so rooted in everything. It's rooted in nonprofits. It's rooted in activism. And you wrote, this is the canon. Like, it's just like your experience, and I would say American cultural imperialism, which is oftentimes white, or stolen from Black and brown culture and made whitewashed. That's just, it's just universal whiteness across the board. And I don't know. I want to hear your thoughts about this. Especially.
I mean, yeah, and I think too, I always run into this thing of like, there are only so many Black people in the world. So it's like, so I'm like, well, you can only have so many because there are only so many. But generally speaking, yeah, I think like there is this universal assumption of whiteness, and in this article, what she's saying that leads to is the existence of special and non-white programs that emerge from the logic of a liberalist project of multiculturalism. And so I think this is central to current DEI initiatives in classical music organizations. What they do is they create a culturally specific program. So they say, oh, we're an orchestra, and you can go Google, there are hundreds of these. We are an orchestra, and we're going to start a DEI fellowship. Okay. And all of these Black and brown musicians who deserve to be in our ensemble anyway, we're going to make them audition for a seat with lower pay, and they can only stay there for one season, which is, between 9 and 12 months, obviously. And that's what we're going to do. And she's saying that this is bad. Like, this is not really the work, and that there is no accountability, which is another really big part of, like generally organizing work is accountability.
Yep.
But she's saying that, there's no accountability for making sure that these things work and that they're meaningful. And it's like, yeah, like these projects. And I want to know, like, if we're not doing the projects, then what can we do?
Yeah.
because I see these projects popping up, and I think that is progress, but it is only progress because of this universal assumption of whiteness. It is not actual progress.
Yeah.
And so, like, if we don't have these programs, what do we do? I don't know.
I don't even say it's complicated. Like, I think if you're okay with like maybe jumping forward to, and then we'll go back to the pursuing a radical anti-violence agenda inside and outside a nonprofit structure. So like jumping, they talk so much about the idea of recentering as opposed to being inclusive or diverse. And I don't want to say it struck me, but it was just like such a clear solution to like, and it's what it's like what people have been saying for decades. Like, it shouldn't be a surprise, but it's like, no, you can't just be inclusive. Like, you have to recenter the narrative, the power, the wealth into the hands of Black, Brown, Indigenous people, queer people, preferably women of color, in my opinion. Like, you need to put, like, you need to give people power. You have to redistribute, and you have to rebuild the entire organization around that. And it shouldn't be a radical idea, but we treat it in classical music as if it is. Like, if you heard a white executive director of a symphony, which a lot of them are usually white men, go, I'm stepping down and giving up power to make way for somebody else, and the organization needs to get in line, people would be like, oh, I'm sorry. What? Or even, I think, you and I are talking about this, like, just inviting the community to have a say on your board of directors is like easy solution.
Yes.
Giving them power and say should be easy solution. But there's always, but what?
The resistance that we have come up against for saying that, you would think that we suggested that people step off the board, which is, again, people are not listening to us when we talk because, like, which is obvious, but we never said to like take away board seats,
no,
or anything like that. We've just said, like, what as the people like to say, add a seat to the table, make the table a little bit bigger, which is, again, it's like a terrible analogy or whatever, metaphor, but like, that's not that really of a radical idea.
no.
But yeah, I think that you bring up the really important point that I think I need to remember is, like, it's really the recentering of the work as the what should be happening, and these EI programs, fellowships, things like that, which I'm not gonna lie, I benefit from, but like, that they are not the end goal of the work.
Yeah.
And that the solutions are to recenter the work, to recenter people of color, marginalized people in that work.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's like, it's hard. The more you read, the more you're like, I want to burn it all down. But it's also like taking a step back and being like, okay, these DI initiatives are in the interim, right? Like, not there's something, right? Like, we're slowly moving the needle of progress, but it's just really changing that idea, right? I think with a lot of, like, senior leadership, especially in classical music, to just keep pushing them to that idea of recentering, and when the executive director's term is up, pushing the board of directors thought into, hey, you don't always have to give into this idea of professionalization. Like, people's lived experiences and their work experience is just as valid as a PhD, or like that kind of idea. And that opens up a whole wide world of people that you can bring into that position if you want, that would not otherwise have that position, right? Like, just sorry, I don't know what I'm trying to say there. But yeah, shifting narrative. Sorry.
No, I think this part, like, really, that little snippet, just really related to what we're trying to do in art, music right now, that I think is coming, it's happening. Of course, now I'm learning that if we were to have a larger movement, a coalition of sorts nationally, then the work could have even greater impact. And not that it doesn't have impact locally, but I think sometimes we too forget that national scope is necessary.
Yeah. I mean, we're always stronger together, right? Yeah.
So let's go. We're just gonna skip back really quickly, just because we're gonna go in order of the way the essays appear in the book. This great essay, social change, or sorry, social service or social change by Paul Cavell, and the large scale part he mentions in the very first page, and he was saying he would look around and he would see that there was just like no large scale movements to end. What he's talking about is male violence.
Mm-hmm.
So their scope in this essay and a couple of the ones in this section are about anti-violence,
Mm-hmm.
which is I learned so much about the anti-violence
Same,
movement
yeah.
reading this book. But yeah, he defines social change and social service work, I think, really well. And it's like, that's what it is,
Yes.
So social service work addresses the needs of individuals reeling from the personal and devastating impact of institutional systems of exploitation and violence. And social change work challenges the root causes of exploitation and violence. So, service, of course, what we think of it as like direct service, fulfilling that need that the government refuses to meet. Where social change is that consciousness shift, like that shift in who we are, what we do, what we believe in.
Yeah, and I think anytime we refer to like this is a solution in the interim or whatever, like that's what we're talking about with like social service work.
Yeah. So maybe you could see, I mean, this is a stretch. I mean, maybe it's not a stretch. You could see, these fellowships and programs and everything as this social service work, because it does provide a service, a necessary service in the meantime while we're working towards social change, but they still feel a little removed.
Yeah, no, definitely.
So he goes into, you kind of mentioned this, but he describes it as the U.S. economic pyramid.
Yes.
Do you want to talk about the pyramid?
Yes, I'll try not to go off on a rant. So he breaks down the economic pyramid into three categories, which is reminiscent of socialism and Marxism. So we have the ruling class, which is the 1%, and they maintains the power and the money to influence the decisions that affect our lives. Then we have the managerial class, which I think we oftentimes forget exists. Which is, according to his stats, and I think this came out in 2005, it's 19% of the population, and they hold 44% of the nation's wealth. And going back to the ruling class, they maintain 47% of the wealth and 1% of the population. And then under the professional managerial class, we have the middle and working class, unemployed, welfare, homeless, etc. And they're 80% of the population and only hold 9% of the nation's wealth. And a lot of this essay actually talks about the professional and managerial class in reference to the nonprofit industrial complex, which I think is particularly relevant to classical music for a variety of reasons. But before we go on, is there anything you wanted to add to that economic pyramid?
No, just that I say no and then I go on. Start talking. I guess my small addition would just be that it's important to understand these things broadly, to know where you are, to where you see yourself, and where others are. Because as artists, as musicians, like, we're on this pyramid.
Yeah.
Like, we don't want to say that we make money from our art because that makes our art less valuable for some people. But we are, we live in, again, a capitalist society, so understanding this, which I think does a really good job of just like breaking it down really simply.
Yeah.
Is
I think
so.
I think too, what we oftentimes forget about the professional managerial class, and I would make the argument that a lot of classical musicians and classical music administrators fall into the managerial class, is because of our level of education a lot of the time, and our access to and our privilege to networks of wealth and resources. So our proximity to wealth and patronage is oftentimes what we forget. We're oftentimes in classical music, we're kind of conditioned to always be like, oh, we're poor. We don't have money. We don't have this. And like, don't get me wrong, like it's hard out there sometimes. But if you're part of an organization, you are within proximity to people with wealth to a degree that most people don't have. Like the fact that just from personal experience, I was an operations manager at a middle symphony, but the fact that I was backstage telling senators or House of Representative people who wanted to come to the symphony or the opera or whatever, oh, you go out on stage now, or I'm just having like general banter with, is not a normal thing. And we forget that. The fact that, that proximity is a privilege in and of itself. Sorry, that's my rant. I'll get off my soapbox.
And are you going to use it or lose it?
You can use it or lose it. Yeah, I think like in reference to the nonprofit industrial complex, though, the managerial class often acts as a barrier, which I think we discussed a little bit.
Yes.
Before
they create the buffer zone, which is what which is this zone of, he says the buffer zone comprises all occupations that carry out the agenda of the ruling class without requiring ruling class presence or visibility.
Mm-hmm.
So all of us middle managers, literally, at these nonprofits, these classical music organizations, who are just like doing our job and carrying out the agendas of the EDs, the ADs, and the board of directors.
Yep. And foundations.
Yeah. Yes, of course. How could I forget?
How could we forget the foundation? Yeah. I think I made a little note too, we're in classical music and classical music nonprofits. We're always talking about like, oh, we want to broaden our audience, blah, blah, blah. And I think we get caught up in the professional managerial class a lot of the time. And these are oftentimes like the white liberals. They're the NPR listening liberals, which is fine. But we really cannot, like, oftentimes we are not connecting with the working class. We are just so disconnected, or we've been just really removed via art school and the infrastructure that we've put up, that we're thinking about like audience participation, and we just like really just cut ourselves off within this like weird barrier class. And it's just such a disservice to any DEI initiative that we're trying to carry out, that kind of thing. That's just my assumption or my theory, but yeah.
No, I mean, I agree. And I think it's hard to, because of the way that our communities are set up, right? Like, we're not meant to talk to other people who are not in our class, right?
Yeah. Divide and conquer.
Right. So yeah, like people aren't talking to other people because they don't feel like they need to, or they should, or that they're supposed to. So which is terrible, right? Like, people should just be people. We should just be talking to everyone regardless of their socioeconomic status or anything else.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say I don't know how, but of course we know how, right?
Yeah.
We're just not doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think Paul, he said he has a lot of really good questions in this essay. Like, if you do read an essay, it's really good just kind of leading questions of like, okay, so you've recognized that you're part of the professional managerial class, or nonprofits oftentimes work within this. Once again, like he addresses foundations and white liberal leadership in nonprofits, de-radicalizing movements, that kind of thing. What can you do now? And I think he really comes up on this idea of you have privilege and it's your job to subvert the system. And it's a risk. Like, it's a risky thing to do. But if you're actually acting within this system and you want to make a change, you're going to have to put some skin in the game.
Mm-hmm.
Is kind of what I pulled away from this.
Yes, I totally agree. And yeah, the questions are great. So it's kind of like that work that she talked about in one of the previous essays, like your organization has to like figure these things out, and it takes time, and it costs money because it takes time. But like these are like some great places to start.
Mm-hmm.
If you are a journaler, I would highly recommend journaling about all of these kinds of questions, and just like really thinking through, you know, what this means for you and the work that you hope to be doing, personally and professionally.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Professionally.
Yeah.
Oh, he says the ruling class co-ops leaders from our communities by providing them with jobs in nonprofit and government agencies, hence realigning their interests with maintaining the system, which is what I kind of said earlier.
Yeah.
Just like, again, that's a thread through all of these essays.
It's so sad. Yeah. Once again, just trying to figure out if you're working, what you're doing at that moment in time. Is it reform or is it radical change? And I think that clarity, or even that question, has really provided clarity in my own work. And who are you accountable to is a big thing in this essay.
Yeah.
Who are you accountable to? And I think that's something that anybody in nonprofits, anybody trying to do social change, and I would venture to say if you're white, you should not be accountable to yourself. Just gonna throw that out there. And if you're an ED of a nonprofit, you should be accountable to your community, not your funders.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. That's a tweet.
That's pretty. No, I mean, it really is like who. Well, and he says you should be accountable, and you just said it. And he also says we need to be accountable to those groups and take direction from their actions and issues.
Yep.
And accountability is really hard and really difficult because we're not used to it.
Mm-mm.
Personally or professionally. And so it's hard. I think of course it's possible, and it is figuring out it's figuring out like what does that mean?
Yeah.
Like, is accountability like someone being upset with something you wrote on a website and then you changing it? Like, is that accountability? Again, I don't think that websites are social change work. So I'm going to say no. But, like, that's just one example that I see a lot of, like, of someone seeing something upset, and someone seeing something online, and they're upset about it, and so they say something about it publicly, and they're trying to quote like hold the organization accountable, and the organization changes it or they don't, and people are like, well, the organization is not accountable and blah blah, and it's just like, I don't know that that's really true accountability.
I totally agree with that. I think it's like this idea as well of you should be accountable to your local community and take direction from them. And the reason for that is you do have to really suss out who you are accountable to, because not all marginalized groups, we've talked about this on this podcast before, it's not a monolith. Like,
yeah,
it's not a monolith of thought. So you're going to face divisions, but if you're accountable to X organization led by X group in your community, and they're like, no, this is in line with what we're doing, you're falling into line, then you're like, okay, I'm doing my job.
Yes. Yes.
And if you want to bring up something that was brought up to you, maybe have like a discussion with the party in which you are accountable to. I think that's something. But, you can't, it's impossible to be accountable to everybody.
Everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's again a tweet.
Yeah.
It's really not. And you saying something, I'm using you broadly, like you person saying something to me, person behind the computer, um, and me not changing it doesn't mean that I'm not accountable to you or that I don't care
Hmm.
about what you say. But like you just said, like we're not monoliths here. So there will be some disagreement. There will be some,
Always have discourse.
yeah, there will be discourse. Like that's just part of it.
Hmm. Hmm.
And just because I don't jump when you ask me to doesn't mean that I'm not part of the discourse.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's like one of those things with accountability, like going into classical music is oftentimes classical music is such a pyramid structure. And I think I don't know, stop me if I'm wrong, but I think kind of what we're getting at is like accountability is flipping that power structure on its head. Like if you're the AD at an organization, think about your accountability of programming not to the board of directors and the ED, but like to the orchestra musicians or whatever and the other classical music administrators. And then think even deeper. Are you accountable to the community at large or like to one organization? Like you want to do your, women's concert in March. What women's group are you accountable to? Who are you collaborating with? Who are you talking to make it actually a meaningful performance experience, right?
Right.
Um, so I think that's like where this kind of thought process can really be put into action in music organizations.
And it's really just like, as we've discussed, talking to people, right? And asking them what they think and being genuinely interested in what they have to say
Yeah.
and what they think. And again, that doesn't mean that you always make change, but it means that you listen and that you consider deeply what people have to say because you ask them. So if you
Mm-hmm.
ask, then you have to consider,
Mm-hmm.
what people have to say.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, accountability is hard. I think for me, um, well, this is not about me, but my podcast.
Go for it.
No, this is as much my show as it is yours and everyone else's. But it's difficult when you are too a soloist,
Yeah.
and in the guitar world, you are a soloist first.
Mm-hmm.
If you happen to play chamber music, well, good on you. But you are bred to be a soloist. You are bred to be someone who can't play with other people, who doesn't know how to stay in time, and who doesn't sight read. Like that's what you are supposed to be. That's what your career trajectory is.
Mm-hmm.
And so, how are you as one person being held accountable to a movement, a group? That's
Yes.
well. The thing is, you do that by being involved in your community and listening and showing up and showing out. But I think a lot of people aren't willing to do that yet. So it's like, how are you accountable as one single person?
Man, I just want to like elevate that thought. Like, show up for your community, right? Like, yes, you're a soloist, but like, what are you doing in your community? Because like, we all have beliefs, right?
Right.
And it's just like, it's such a simple solution to be like, oh, I believe in X. I'm going to show up for X. And I am now accountable to this anti-racism group. I'm accountable to this workers' movement group. Um, or I mean, like I think even more simply, if you're, I mean, I hope so. Like if you have a diverse group of friends and family and colleagues, you should be accountable to your colleagues. You should be accountable to the people who you're interacting with on your day-to-day life
Mm-hmm.
and making sure that you're truly listening to your friends. Like it should be a simple solution.
Right.
But then again, there are a lot of people who don't have like a diversity
Friends.
of voices. You just aim at people. Just don't
and well, and two, it like this work. No, I can go with, but yeah, this work doesn't always manifest itself in programming.
exactly.
But I mean, it should. It That's the thing. I'm saying that like it should always manifest itself in your programming, but that should be like. But we're talking. I am talking beyond programming.
Yeah.
I am assuming that you, as an individual soloist, have figured out your programming. That you have got your concentric circles going on of people whose identities intersect, and that we have moved past that. Like that's what I'm assuming. I'm assuming. So, but if you are not there yet, then
Get there.
There are resources.
It's 2020. It is the end of 2020. Y'all need to get there.
So like be doing the work, that work, but beyond that, like that accountability piece is like, it doesn't have to manifest itself in a theme of a concert that's like protest music.
Yes,
it can, and like. And that too can be really impactful, but do that when you've committed to your community. Do that when you've been to a protest and you can understand what that means and how that music fits into that larger music, like that larger movement. Like that is when you do those types of programming initiatives, which can be really impactful. In the same way that someone parlaying knowledge through a book can be really impactful, but it's showing up, it's listening, it's being held accountable, it's going to the thing and inviting people to your thing, so that they can like it's mutual, so that everyone can see what's happening.
No, just absolutely being accountable. And like you're 100% like infrastructure things. What is your office environment feeling like? Who are your donors? Who are you engaging with board of directors? Who are you accountable for all of those things? It's like, yes, go beyond programming. Like I just cannot emphasize that enough. Like,
Okay, so I think we can talk about the next essay, which you kind of already did, but again, this is pursuing a radical anti-violence agenda inside, outside of a nonprofit structure. So any kind of initial thoughts there?
I think it's just really going back to that recentering work, just making it a non-negotiable, in my opinion, like making the centering of Black, brown, disabled people voices, making things accessible, non-negotiable, which they talked about a lot, even though it costs money a lot of times. And that's something that, I mean, I forget just because like, it's just not an experience, right? Like as simple as like, are you making your PowerPoints colorblind accessible, right? Like just like simple stuff like that, right? Like, I think that's really what stuck out to me. And this kind of idea of having to rebuild to make this a reality. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
How about you?
You're right. Yeah. I mean, the rebuilding to make it a reality. Ooh, like, just gonna put that on a shirt. I really feel like maybe that's where we are.
Yeah.
And how we do that, I mean, we listen to people, we read books, we talk to them, we become invested in the work, because it is possible. Like there are organizations, that we've mentioned here today that you can go really like learn more about specifically, who have managed to divest or disinvest. I've heard it said both ways. From larger organizations to become and to like rebuild into smaller but really impactful organizations who are doing their work the way that it is meant to be done. I would say broadly in their eyes, but also like what we really claim to be striving for is what they're actually doing.
Yes.
So,
yeah. And I think it's just one of those things too where they kind of talk about they're like, we don't want to offer a model, but we do offer up our narrative, like kind of how to do it. And they do go into this whole like, we do have, or we were working within the system, but we were subverting the system at the same time, where it was like developing a double speak when you have to talk to city officials, which I mean, they bring up like, I think code switching, like that's something that a lot of people have to do in their day-to-day life anyway. But if you're going to, once again, if you live in a society, sometimes you have to come up with these almost defensive tactics is the best way I can describe it, to actually make the social change that you need to make. And it is risky, and you have to realize that. But I think in the end, it's worth it.
Agreed. And I think it's funny you brought up your job title. I think she mentions like they went from something to community engagement.
Yeah.
I forget what it exactly was, but that was
my title is the whitewashed version of community organizing, because that scares people.
Yes.
Yeah. Collective action scared the wealthy. That's all I gotta say.
So again, I mean, they're all great. Just read them all.
Yeah.
Just read them all. And the last essay, forgot what we were reading. The last essay is the NGOization of the Palestine Liberation Movement. And this was actually written by the person who compiled the book, which is kind of cool to see. Random side note there. Fun fact. Okay. I think this was just a really great overall history of the Palestine Liberation Movement because, and again, like, sure, it's in a book and not, I just think like I've been a person who has wanted to understand more about that situation and that occupation, and like Googling it just doesn't get you anywhere. Or like watching a YouTube video is not going to get you where I think this book, this essay in particular, gets you. So that's my like overall thought process about this one.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, it's a essay / interview with like 3 on the ground activists, which, yes, it's a Palestine liberation movement, but there's just so much from it that you can glean, I feel like, into any organization, any NGO, any nonprofit, any on the ground work that you're doing. And I think the big takeaway, at least for me, was like what they hammered all the time: where is the money coming from? Who are they accountable to? And oftentimes they're not accountable to the people on the ground. They're accountable to the people giving them funds.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I'm not going to go on a rant because I just have so many opinions about Western imperialism.
But it's manifested itself in a lot of ways in this movement in particular. And it's very, very easy to see that when you start reading this essay. So,
totally agree.
This was a side note. It's part of the essay. There is a poem here called 3 Home Demolitions and 1 Pending Order. And I'm not going to read the poem, but this was like an example of what I think people think they're doing when they commission a work that like has you know what I mean?
Yes.
They're like, and this happens a lot, gosh, but somebody will be like, I want you to write me a piece about something. And it's like an experience that neither the person writing the piece nor the person commissioning the piece has, but they want to like explore and or capitalize off of in some way. And I don't know. That happens a lot. And I don't know how to mitigate that, or if that's something that we need to mitigate, because like maybe it's not bad, right? Like somebody is creating a piece of work that is supposed to work towards social change. Like
Mhm.
I'm supposed to listen to this piece about um you know the AIDS outbreak in the 80s and early 90s, and I'm supposed to like, you know, all of a sudden after this piece be pro queer liberation. And
Yeah.
I don't know. I really don't. I think about this a lot because
Same.
I commissioned people and they'll be like, "Do you have a theme?" And it's like, "No, actually I don't. I just want you to make the art." And I don't want them to write a theme because of this, because of that idea. Like, and the poem is not about this. The person who wrote this poem is like a first person account who has like lived this, and so
Yes.
it's like yes, yes,
Yes.
like please like make this thing. This is beautiful. But I'm thinking of like in music, we a lot of times are like just really removed from topics and themes like this. So I don't know.
No, I think you're getting at the heart of it. Like, I 100% agree. I see a lot of people who are like, I want to make this piece, like, it's about this. And it feels like it misses the mark. And in this particular essay, they call one of these interviewees a cultural worker, which I think was
Mm-hmm.
it really just stuck out to me. And what they kind of define is like, so cultural worker is she was writing, performing, and producing pieces meant to transcend the otherwise formidable structures we battle daily. And I've been thinking about this a lot because I've been reading a book called Who Paid the Piper, which is not to go on too far of an aside, but about the CIA and how they co-opted a lot of um, musicians, specifically classical musicians like Leonard Bernstein, a lot of jazz musicians, to normalize neoliberal values. And after World War II in Germany, to kind of fight back against cultural imperialism of the USSR. And I think that's where our power oftentimes lies in our music if we understand it, right? Is like we have the power to normalize progressive ideas. Like I think about TV, right? A lot. Like
Right.
the more representation I see on TV, like LGBT rights has gotten easier to talk about with my parents because they see more queer representation in media. And it's just this continual hammering home and normalization of these topics. And going back to what you were saying, like a lot of times when we do it in classical music, it feels very shallow, or we're commissioning people who aren't living these experiences, or they're like forced to write about these things and not on their own terms. And I don't know how to reconcile that yet, but
Yeah. Yeah.
it's interesting to me.
Yeah, I don't, and let's have that conversation at some point.
We will.
Uh, so yeah, I mean, just overall, again, a great one. They're all great. 10 out of 10 would recommend, would read. So, any overall takeaways from you that you'd like to kind of just wrap up here?
Yeah, I have five, and please feel free to insert your thoughts. So my big one is just recentering, right? Just going back to that idea of like my takeaway: recenter narrative, recenter wealth, recenter power to the communities, specifically Black, Brown people that you're supposedly trying to include. Just give them power, rebuild around them. It's my, I don't know. That's my big takeaway. Um, to really recognizing and fighting against universal whiteness and capitalism and how that plays into universal whiteness. Right, talking about how we had a conversation about the canon, and thinking about classical concert experiences and donors, all plays into that idea. You hit on the social justice nonprofits versus nonprofits with a business pursuit. Understanding which one you are, And I'm not demonizing you if you are a nonprofit with a business pursuit, but like really just understanding what you're doing within our society. Fighting against professionalization and understanding when you are part of the professional class is a big thing for me. I think I took away from this. And then reparations, which I think we'll just have a whole podcast on reparations in classical music, because that's a big topic. Yeah. But realizing that that's something that everybody should be working towards, and if you're white, it's your job to dismantle those systems. So that's kind of, those are like my 5 big themes from part 2 of The Revolution Will Not Be Funded.
I would say that, yes, I would agree with these takeaways and themes. And like in the last episode, our kind of modified outline book notes will be published alongside the episode. So you can go and read those if, the book is not on your TBR right now, which I totally get. There will be a link in the show notes where you can purchase this book using the podcast's bookshop affiliate link. So that means like you purchase the book, it doesn't cost you anything, but the podcast gets a little bit of something on the side, because we live in a capitalist society. But it does help out. So if you would like to purchase the book, you can do that there. It's a great book. Really would recommend it. Next time on the Musically Cogitating Book Club, we will be bringing you part 3 of this book, which is the final part. And the name of that part is, let me get to it. Rethinking Nonprofits and Reimagining Resistance. So maybe we'll have an essay here that does talk about, what is a world without nonprofits? I don't know, but I would love to have that conversation.
Same. I'd love to see it.
So, thank you all for listening to us go on and on about this. It's so much fun. So glad that we have a book club. And we'll see you in the next episode.
Bye, y'all.
All right. What did you think about that? Again, I would love for you to join us in the Discord server, where we can have a little bit of chat about this particular episode, about the book, about the nonprofit industrial complex, because it is a big topic. Don't forget to follow the podcast on social media and the website. There's also a newsletter you can subscribe to, which I send out at the end of every month with a little bit of special stuff about the show and a recap of the past month's episodes. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, please give us a like, rating, and review, as this helps me to make the show better. And of course, if you are on Podchaser, I'm there, so you can do that there as well. You can also support the show by buying us coffee or a book using the Buy Me a Coffee or Support the Show link in the show notes. And if you'd also like to support the show, you can do so by purchasing this book and any other future Musically Cogitating Podcast Book Club books through our bookshop link. So it doesn't cost you anything, but we receive just a small commission. So that is all that I have for you today, folks. We will, of course, be back in 2 weeks with the next episode of the Musically Cogitating Podcast. Until then, bye-bye.
Thank you.